What's up, guys? Today we have Emma Richards. She's a recent graduate of the women's lacrosse team at Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. Over her 4 years at Wesleyan, she was a part of three NCAA appearances, including a Sweet 16 and Final Four run. So thanks for being here today, Emma.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So first question, what's the best advice that Coach Williams has given you?
I think probably the way she says it is she says always go dive over the line, and I've translated that into always giving 110% in anything you do. Obviously, she's our lacrosse coach, so most of the time she's wanting us to dive over an actual line in a sprints or a game, but it's definitely transcended that and become part of just my personality and my mindset with schoolwork, seeking jobs, future jobs, whatnot. So that was probably the best piece of advice that she gave me over the 4 years.
Awesome. And then, the lacrosse process has always been, or excuse me, the lacrosse recruiting process has notoriously been known for starting super early for guys and girls. So, when and how should an athlete reach out to a coach if they want to start early?
I definitely think that it never hurts to reach out to a coach. I mean, middle school would be a little bit early, but I'd say ninth grade, 10th grade, even though there's new rules within the past, I want to say 4 or 5 years about when Division I schools can start recruiting. Uh, it's always good to have your name out there and, letting schools know you're interested, because then when they show up to recruiting camps or go to tournaments, they already have your name in the back of your mind. But it's also when you're in high school, from personal experience, I was a sophomore when I originally committed to a Division I program, and I barely knew my left hand from my right when playing lacrosse. And I ended up decommitting, obviously, and going to Wesleyan, and that was really hard for me. And so, thankfully, because the different rules in the NCAA have prevented from those really early recruiting, it's also just like knowing yourself and knowing that you will end up where you're supposed to. But it's also like it's never. I mean, again, middle school would be too early, but it never hurts to, if you live near a school that you're interested in, emailing a coach and saying, I'm going to be walking around campus. I'd love to meet with you. I mean, even though they can't respond back if you're not of a certain age, and then also just popping into people's offices for coaches is probably my best advice for when to start the recruiting process.
Awesome. And then do you mind just talking about your experience about how you were committed to a D1 school and then how, you ended up choosing Wesleyan and, decommitting from a D1 school and why you kind of chose to go D3?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely an interesting road. The club team that I played for in Colorado, we were D1 oriented. So it was when I was playing, it was everyone was going D1, D2, D3. That wasn't even an option. And so my sophomore year, the University of Denver offered a scholarship and like a verbal commitment to me. And my sophomore year self was like, this is the best thing that could ever happen to me. I know I want to play lacrosse in college. This is where I want to go. And I think I didn't take into account that college is not just about playing a sport. It's also, finding yourself, becoming independent, but also like becoming a student and finally choosing things that you want to study and major in and pursue going forward. And so through high school, I started to realize that more in myself and realized that I had a lot of other passions. Like I was in an a cappella group in high school. I was in the mock trial and a lot of top Division I programs, which University of Denver is. It is lacrosse is your number one job, and there's not a lot of other room for extracurriculars, which some people, that's what they want to do with their lives. And I totally respect that. That just wasn't for me. So my senior year, I want to say a couple weeks before I was supposed to sign the national letter of intent, I called the coach and respectfully decommitted, and just let them know that I needed to, one, go out of state and that I didn't think Division I was the best fit for me. Nothing against University of Denver or the coach or the players. I had a lasting relationship with some of my fellow commits. And I then was like, I'm not going to play sports in college, and I just want to go to the East Coast. And that was very short, to say the least. I need sports in my life, not only to be structured and grounded, but also I'm not a huge person into working out when there's no, end goal. And so for me being healthy, I was doing, and my dad and I went through a whirlwind college tour where we went to like 14 East Coast schools in a span of like 5 or 6 days. And I could repeat to you, what they say, honestly, because of how many we did. And then I started realizing, wait, no, I do want to play lacrosse in college. Like, it's been a part of my life since third grade. It's really helped me become the person I am. And I walked into Kim's office, and she was actually leaving. And so it was kind of a funny story. My dad made me wear boots that had little heels on them and a dress, and it was freezing because it was like later fall. And I had to walk from Freeman, which, if anybody's familiar with Wesleyan's campus, I had to walk from Freeman to the admissions office back and forth 6 times, because the first time we went there, Kim was going out to lunch. Then I had to go back to admissions for the tour, went back, she still wasn't back. I had to go back for an interview with the admissions office, and then go back again and finally talk to her. And she was definitely hesitant at first, and I found out later she used to hate people walking into her office. She used to just it just wasn't her forte. She just would get nervous or something like that. But since then she's changed that. And I was like, look, this is the school of my dreams. I would love to be here. I know this is late in the process. I know it's probably going to be an ED2 decision, whatnot, but this is my top choice. And so she went through old film from me, highlight reels, whatnot. And thankfully they had a spot in the ED2 admission pool, and I committed, and I already miss it, to be honest.
Definitely, that's awesome. I think that's super helpful because I think a lot of times, since it does start super early, it can be stressful for kids who realize maybe the school they originally committed to isn't the right fit. So I think that is going to be super informative for a lot of people. And then could you just, if you remember any of the best ID clinics that you went to and were super helpful, for your recruiting process, whether that was tournaments or specific ID clinics, if you could just give us a picture of specifically which ones were super helpful for you in your recruiting process.
Yeah. I've got to say I'm not the best to ask, being from Colorado, since my club team probably could really only afford and make it to 2 tournaments a summer, and then maybe 1 or 2 in the fall when it was our junior year and senior year in high school. But I do remember the Annapolis Challenge, I believe is what it's called, at the Navy, University of Navy, I'm not really sure, was really great. There was a lot of college coaches there. It's also in the fall, so it's not scorching heat and humidity, which in Colorado we don't have much humidity, and it was always a huge adjustment. So that one I definitely recommend. And then I think it's that one. And then there's one called the Capital Cup, I believe, which is also in the fall. And that one, I want to say, is in Virginia or somewhere on the East Coast again. And that one, later on, because I think it's only for juniors and seniors in high school, were definitely really important. And then I'm not going to remember the name, but it's a huge tournament. It's men's lacrosse and women's lacrosse, and it's in Florida during the summer. And that one was the most helpful for me personally, because they filmed all the games, and I'm sure there's some recruiting, website for coaches, but it's free access for them. And that's what ended up having Kim be more interested in me, is that she was able to see that, which not all tournaments are filmed. So those were definitely the top 3 tournaments. And then I'd say for camps, I personally did not like them at all. So I only did, I think 1, but I would recommend camps if you know where you're really interested in going to school. Early on, as a freshman in high school, I thought I wanted to go to the University of Virginia, and so I went to that camp. And it was helpful because they told me they weren't interested. And so I was able to move on in the process. But I definitely do recommend that if you can find, your school's camp, or really making sure that, whether it's just like a region, like if you want to go to the East Coast, and you want to play Division III, definitely look at camps that have those, or like the actual schools camps or clinics, is really helpful. Because I think earlier on when I was a freshman, the one that I went to that was in Maryland, it was a million coaches. I didn't know really anything about any of the schools at that point either. And while I definitely had a lot of great lacrosse training, I think it's a better use of your time, as an athlete and just like as an individual, to really choose your camps wisely based on whether it's geographic origin of where you want to go to school or specific schools.
Definitely, and that's a great insight. Thank you. And then touching on the video aspect, do you think highlight videos are a good resource for coaches? And can you give the high school athletes an idea of how long the video should be, and like some do's and don'ts when you're putting them together?
Yeah, definitely. I made one later in the process, after I decommitted, and my dad helped me. And I would say it was pretty epic. I tried to find it the other day. There was some pretty suspenseful music in the background, which I think just keeps it interesting. I do think highlight videos can be useful, but from what I've heard talking to different coaches and athletes, it's not, the end all be all. Like if you have the best highlight video known to mankind, there's still a chance that they won't take you. And I think it's just because a lot of college coaches, especially for women's lacrosse, want to see what you do off ball. And frankly, you don't want a highlight video of, one of your friends or teammates scoring, because, you want it to be about you. And I think specifically with women's lacrosse, I can't speak on a lot of other women's sports. I think that's kind of why they can be helpful, but if you don't have one, that doesn't mean, you're not going to get recruited or anything. And I would definitely also keep it, short and sweet. It's similar to a resume. You want it one page, because most of your future employers or schools, they're not going to want to read, 6 pages of what you've done with your life, or watch like 6 or 7 minutes of a video. But if you can show, your flexibility on the field, your, sportsmanship, your coachability as much as possible in a short video, that would be really helpful. So I'd say probably 2 minutes and 30 seconds to 3, maybe cap it at 5. But just know, if you don't have the technology or the resources to make a highlight video, it by no means is a determinant on whether or not you will get recruited and play in college for whatever sport.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. Thank you. What was the most difficult transition you found when you arrived to Wesleyan playing Division III lacrosse, and how were you able to adjust to those differences?
I think even though I have been playing a sport since 3rd grade, when you get to college, it is a lot more demanding, in a good way for me specifically. But, I never really lifted before, and recognized how important lifting is to prevent injuries and whatnot, and to just grow as a player. And I think the biggest transition was navigating a rigorous academic schedule with also a rigorous athletic schedule. I mean, I would say Kim Williams runs our program like a Division I program, which is why I think we are so successful. And again, going back to her best advice, she expects 110%, even if she's not with us until February 15th. And so that was a big transition, but I also had the best teammates in the entire world. I had 3 captains that I would, be able to sleep on their couch if I needed to get to a lift early because I lived, farther away from Freeman. Or I had another junior, reach out and help me organize my schedule because I was, panicking having my classes and then having to get a lift in and then do running and wall ball, whatnot. So that was the most difficult transition, but I do believe that specifically at Wesleyan, obviously I can't talk about other schools, my teammates were so there for me because they all went through it. And that was so helpful. And it made the transition even though it was difficult, it made it smoother and, you know, more fast paced. So I kind of got into, you know, the rhythm of being a college athlete at Wesleyan University a lot quicker than I could have if I didn't have that amazing support system from my teammates and coach.
Definitely. That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that the teammates were super supportive. And then actually this leads into our next question. When hosting a recruit on an official visit, from your experience once you were at Wesleyan, what do kind of like the players look for in that recruit? And can you offer, you know, students who are student athletes in high school that are going on recruits, or sorry, that are going on these visits, any like do's and don'ts of like questions to ask and, you know, general behavior in terms of, you know, recruitment visits?
Yeah, I think ultimately it is very important that you are authentic and yourself because whether, you know, sometimes there's going to be schools where you visit that you don't jive as much with, you know, the other teammates that you meet or even your host. I mean, I had one other official visit that I did that, I mean, my host was wonderful, but it just, I was my, I was very authentic and true to myself, and it just, I could see that like it wasn't a great fit with my personality, but it was nothing against them. And so I think ultimately stay true to yourself, and it's hard not to want to impress everyone and be like, oh, you know, I have great, you know, ACT scores, or I'm a great lacrosse player, whatnot. But it just kind of leads away and, you know, leads you away from who you are, because while the official visit is important for, you know, the teammates to kind of get a glimpse at you and to meet the coaches and, you know, be on the campus and in that environment, it's also a time for you to learn and really reflect on whether, you know, these people are, you know, your people. And I'd say for don'ts, I would, you know, I would feel, I would express, you know, gratitude for, you know, the players that are hosting you, because sometimes, I mean, I personally loved having recruits. I thought it was super fun. I love to talk. And so I love to talk about Wesleyan and lacrosse. And so I could just chat their ear off all day. Um, but oh, I just lost my train of thought. I have no
Yeah,
idea.
we can come back to that question if you forgot it or mention it later. It's no worries. We can go into the next question.
It'll come back to me, I
It's all
promise.
good. Yeah. So moving off of that, what are three characteristics that a high school lacrosse player needs to succeed at the college level?
I would say accountability is, I don't want to rank them quite yet, but accountability, not only holding yourself accountable, and especially if you go Division III and you play in a NESCAC, when your coach can't be with you until February 15th, it's on you to make sure that you are doing the lifts and you're doing the running and you're doing the wall ball, because it not only benefits yourself, but it also improves the team and leads to, you know, success. So accountability, I would say respect is really important. Whether or not your teammates are your very best friends in the entire world, or if they're just your teammates and you have their backs, but, you know, you have your other group of friends on campus, that mutual, you know, implicit demand of respect for yourself, but also giving respect to other people, especially on your team, is really important. And I just think it adds to the cohesiveness of your team, and you get to operate so much more as a unit. And I'd say, like, ultimately, I guess it goes along with accountability, but I've always loved like grit or relentlessness, because frankly, it's going to be a transition when, you know, you are recruited and you go to school, because college athletics are nothing like you've ever played before, whether it was club or high school, etc. But having that grit of, you know, you are at that school for a reason. The coach wants you, the team wants you. You can help further the program and, you know, be successful for yourself and, again, the program and the team. But sometimes, you know, you have to like really embody that grittiness to know that when you're at the library at 1 a.m. studying for an exam 2 days later because you had a long practice and you had to go to a late night food dining hall thing, like knowing that it's all supposed to happen the way that it is, and everything happens for a reason, and having that grittiness and just everything, even in academics, just like knowing that you are there for a reason and you are going to be successful as long as like you keep to yourself and you work hard and whatnot.
Awesome. I love that you touched the fact on grittiness because I understand you got injured, while you're at Wesleyan, and I know that can be really frustrating for a bunch of players who've, have worked their ass off throughout the recruiting process, and then you come to school and you get injured. So, how were you able to overcome, those obstacles when you were injured, and just seeing, your best friend succeed in the field, and how were you able to be the best teammate?
Yeah, I would definitely say it was really difficult. I want to say, first off, I had two other of my teammates that are also my close friends tear their ACLs, which was my injury, around the same time as me. So I wasn't alone, and I couldn't have done it without them or our athletic trainer, which was who was amazing. She was the one who called me to let me know what the MRI results were, but it was very difficult. It was my junior year. It was leading up to be the best season I'd ever had. I was one of the top scorers before I tore my ACL. I finally, I played very timidly and in my head freshman and sophomore year, and I'd finally just let that go. And I was just playing because I love the sport. And, tearing my ACL, it was definitely one of the worst things that could have happened at that time. But it also, I think, really strengthened me as a person and as a teammate, because I think it's so easy to check out when you have an injury because you're not on the field and like physically contributing to the success of our team. And that was the year we made to the Final Four, but it also, I was able to program and have this mindset that I would commit 110%, like Kim says, to every rehab, to, every ice session, because that's what you're supposed to do after you tear your ACL. And, really following the protocol very closely, because although I was, bettering myself and strengthening my knee to get back, I was also doing it because I wanted my team to be successful and I wanted to be a part of that success. And so I was working for myself, but also just as much for them. And so I challenge anyone that has an injury going forward, whether it's my season-ending injury or, a lengthy concussion, whatnot, is knowing that it isn't the end of the world and that there are ways that you can still be a critical member of the team, even if you aren't the one, running sprints right next to them or doing the lifts or competing in the Final Four, and staying true to that. Because I think if not, without that, drive to, strengthen and get back into the game, not for yourself and for your teammates, I think it's really easy to get really sad and in a darker place. But it isn't the end of the world. And honestly, I don't think I would have changed anything, because I think I matured so much. And I also have, again, the best teammates ever. And a lot of girls on our team, unfortunately, with the prevalence of female athletes having ACL injuries. I had a lot of other teammates who had gone through it before me, whether it was in high school or in college, and they were mentors to me. They'd send me videos to hype me up so that I'd get up at 6 a.m. and go to PT, or, they'd send me videos to just know that there are other, people that have had ACL injuries and come back and have almost won the Thornton Award, which is one of the biggest awards that you can win in lacrosse. But yeah, I'd say it's just the drive. You need to keep the drive. And as a college athlete, it's ingrained the second you pick up whatever sport you have, and that you play. So that would kind of be, that was my mindset about my knee injury and how I've gained that perspective going forward.
Definitely. I think that's great. That cohesiveness as a team, I think, is super important when you're going through that injury. So on top of that, looking back on, your team's Final Four run, what made your team as successful as they were, yourself included?
I probably go back to accountability. I think being such an underdog team that made program history for the third time in 3 years, coming off, a team that was not very successful, basically since its founding. That accountability of, even though we were playing through finals week where there were some girls, I was thankfully out of finals at that point, but there were some girls where we would have our practice and then they would hole up in the hotel lobby for the next, 4 hours to study for exams, or Kim, our coach, would proctor exams. And so it was a tough time to be in the Final Four. Academically, very stressful. But that accountability that like we have been working since the last game we played the season before to get where we were, and it's the accountability of what we did in our summer for summer workouts, to the fall, to when we were in season, giving nothing less than 110% in everything we did. And it's tedious and it's painful. You get very sore very quickly, but that accountability really united us as a team, and we all shared this common goal that everyone was going to commit every ounce of their being to making it as far as possible, for themselves, but mostly for our teammates. Like there was no one person that was like, I want to be a national championship because that's my dream. But probably much more you'd hear, I am playing because of our seniors this year, or, the girls that are injured that, have to sit on the sidelines. Like this is huge for our program, for our teams, for like who we are on campus. And yeah, just fundamentally is just the foundation of accountability, I'd say, is what really propelled us to being so successful that year.
Awesome. And so, as you know, LRT Sports is a rating and review site for college coaches, similar to Rate My Professor. And I think it's very difficult sometimes for people going through the recruiting process to really find that, cohesive unit within, the team itself, but also, the coach. It seems like your experience with Coach Williams has been like super transformative, not only throughout your college career, but who you are as a person. So, would you have used this resource if it were available to you at the time when you started your recruiting process?
Absolutely. Some of the other schools that I was considering, I have friends that play there that I have just heard horror stories about the coach, because when you recruit and they're interested in you, the coach puts on their best front and they're like, you're going to be a 4-year starter. You are going to be our best, player. You're going to get rookie of the year, et cetera, et cetera. They really are smacking it on, which I think obviously feels great. And I think is a part of, the environment of college recruiting. But I've definitely used the LRT Sports if I could go back, because I think it's always great to have a little bit more of an insight. But yeah, and the story is I would 1,000% have used it.
Awesome. And then, as everyone knows, unfortunately, this season got cut short due to COVID. And college athletes across the nation know that the day will finally come when they can't play college sports anymore. So, how were you able to mentally prepare for that, even though obviously it got cut short? And do you have any advice for people who throughout the college, not only recruiting process, but through your experience at Wesleyan, stuff happens that you can't control, like injuries, and mentally preparing, for example, COVID. So how were you able to adjust to that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Nick, I'm going to give you this piece of advice. It's a gold gem, but I would say that play like every single game or practice or lift is your very last. And because you never know when it will, whether it's, a global pandemic or an ACL injury. You owe it to yourself and your teammates and the program to really, again, I'm going to keep saying it, give 110% everything you do. And unfortunately, even though when I did have my ACL injury, I was unable to play, I still had my teammates. I was still part of the team, the environment. I still would go to lifts and practices. Like I still was there. And I think the difference with, the coronavirus and ending it is we had our spring break trip to Colorado, and it was probably the best send off I could ever have. We all came together, and we all like really banded around us, the seniors, and had a like impromptu senior day. And I think that has been the hardest because with my ACL injury, like I still was there, but here is, I don't have my teammates around that are experiencing the same thing, especially my fellow seniors who I played with all 4 years, who are some of my closest friends. So I would just say, if you can commit to a mindset of never knowing when it's going to be your last game in a more like optimistic sense, not as pessimistic, you never know when it's going to be your last fill in the blank. I think not only will make you truly value the sport and, see how much that sport has meant to you, because we all have spent so many years playing it and dedicated to it. But it also will improve your actual like talent and your team's cohesiveness and whatnot if you can all get on that same page, because you never know whether it's again the coronavirus or us losing in the final four. Those seniors didn't know that we were going to lose in the final four, but they committed 110% because they wanted to get as far as possible, and that happened to be their last game, and they gave everything they got. And so if you can do that and never take anything for granted, even if it's a 6 a.m. lift, which I personally am not a morning person, and those were my least favorite things to do, but don't ever take it for granted, because if you do, you could end up like me and not have your senior season and have regrets about it. But yeah, that is definitely probably the biggest piece of advice that I'm telling anyone that will listen that's still in college, my younger brother, friends, whatnot, is never take it for granted and enjoy every single second, because you never know what's going to be taken away.
Right. Thank you. I super appreciate you giving that insight. And then now the really important questions. Over your time at Wesleyan, what was the funniest thing you saw your teammate do while on the playing field?
Oh gosh. Um, well, there's a few things. They're pretty short. Um, One of them is we had our very first scrimmage my junior year, so I hadn't torn my ACL yet, and we were playing against like Eastern Connecticut, and it had blizzarded the day of and was snowing the entire time, and every single person on the team just was wiping out like crazy, which at the time it was like a little frustrating because you're like, oh, stay on your feet. But when we watched film, it was hilarious because it would just be the craziest falls. And I'd also say, watching some of my teammates deal with face guards, which is, I don't know if it's the same in soccer, but typically with your best, scorers, specifically, you'll put one defender on them to face guard them, and they will just watch you the entire time and won't take part in the other team defense. So it's basically a 6v6. And I've seen teammates everything from sprint up and down the field for the entire half, doing shuffles, karaoke, high knees, to, spin dodges to other teammates who just, pick up a conversation. And some defenders are really into that, and some of them are like, why are you talking to me right now? So definitely observing how my teammates have dealt with face guards is hilarious. And I mostly pity the defender because we are a very wacky, crazy, funny, loud team. And so it's always enjoyable to see what's going to happen and how they're going to deal with the face guard.
That's awesome. And then if you could have one superpower that could change the game of lacrosse forever, what would that be?
I mean, I don't know if this is a superpower, but I'm going to make a superpower. I would make the prevalence of women or female athletes tearing their ACL go down a lot. Something about our body structure. I don't know if that's like, I would, instill them with superpower strength that protects our knees, or I could like see into the future and see when they would make an iffy dodge like I did when I tore. But if we could eliminate ACL injuries, that would be fantastic for all female athletes. Orthopedic surgery may struggle a little bit, but that's not as important. But yeah, that would be probably my superpower if I could, create my own one.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time today, Emma. I know I've learned so much about myself, even after going through the recruiting process, and I'm sure a lot of young athletes will as well. So thank you again for your time.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.